Hello and welcome to this Camera Flow Pro overview walkthrough. Installation is fairly straightforward. You simply go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and in Blender 4.2, we see that you can install from disk up here, and in previous versions of Blender, it's going to be much more obvious the buttons are larger. So in our case, we have it here on the desktop. Select the zip, install from disk. Afterward, just make sure it's enabled. The website here is a link directly to the documentation. Also, if you'd like to reach me directly, you can send a bug issue. Click on this link here, and it's going to take you directly to my page. If you're logged in to Blender Market, you'll see a button appear right here that says Message the Creator. You can direct message me about any issues you have. Something to be aware of if you're using Blender 3.6 is the tooltip links are limited. They are cut off. I have much more description for each of these tooltips, and those are fully documented, and you can read every single one of these in full length if you must use Blender 3.6. Otherwise, I recommend using Blender 4.0 and onward because it shows all of these in full length. The end panel is found in the far right section CFP tab. You can go to View and then enable the sidebar, which is hotkey N, that's why they call it the N panel. And you'll see all your tabs appear. CFP, of course, is Camera Flow Pro, and I've shortened it so that it saves space for other tabs that you may be using. You can resize and just use the icons for your reference. And as you hover, you'll still get the name of the button and you'll still get the tooltips. Of course, you can collapse the panels if you need to. You can rearrange the order of the panels, and they will stay like that per workspace. So we've done this, collapsing everything in animation. If we go to our shading workspace, everything is the way we left it here. So per workspace, you have that flexibility to set it up how you like. Before you add the Camera Flow Pro rig, just deselect everything. Then add it, and you'll see that the root object is by default selected, giving you the ability to simply grab with the G key and move it to where you want it. Another convenience is the camera itself is set as the default camera, so you don't have to switch it yourself. Okay, before we get into the fun buttons, let's talk about rig anatomy. So here you just have a root controller, which is the largest ring, and you have all your items in the outliner, and they're ordered order of operations, if you will. So I've got 0 for the root because generally you're going to move it to where you want in the scene and then just leave it there and not touch it again. Number 1 and number 2 are much more important. Number 1 is the anchor point for the camera location, and this is vital to set your camera where you want to start the shot from. Number 2 is the anchor point for the aiming of the camera, and you're going to want to set this to be right on your subject. The buttons I'll show you later that can do that for you very quickly. So those anchor points instantly move the camera location and the camera aiming with no smoothing on top of that. Now's the fun part where you have the flow controllers. The flow controller for the camera location, you'll see the action if you press spacebar for animation playback and then move it. The smoothing is applied right on top of it. So you can have a bunch of chaotic input for your mouse, and you can have the smooth follow right on top of it. And there's plenty of presets to go through with different types of smoothing, and I'll show you those later. The second flow controller is for the camera aiming. And again, you have to press a spacebar for playback, and you can see it as you move it around during playback. Now, last part of the rig that you can control here in the 3D space is the camera itself has been built so that you can rotate it freely and get Dutch tilt. I mean, you can rotate it full 360 degrees. You can turn the camera upside down if you want to and animate the rotation. And all of that works right on top of the smoothing of the rig itself. So we've manually aimed the camera at our subject, but we don't have to do that. We can certainly use the aiming panel here. So I'm going to hit Reset Rig, bring it out here, select our subject, aim and focus, and that rotates around the root, and it also moves the anchor tracker to subject. So that's an all-in-one button, and you don't always want to rotate the root. If you've got the root placement exactly where you want it, it's great to have these features separate. Focus itself will only take the anchor of the tracker and move it to where you want it. Also, for even more control, you have selected to cursor. So this was built specifically because, yes, there is a Shift S feature, but this feature does not take into account what kind of relationships these anchors have. But if you use selected to cursor, it places exactly where the cursor is for the anchors. So this gives you the control that you need, taking those relationships into account, as well as you can take regular objects and use it if you want to. Now that we've covered aiming, we're going to be moving on to relations, where we can actually track and follow a moving object. Because we've already aimed and focused on the subject, our anchor for tracking is here, and our flow controller is here. So with the subject selected, we're going to do track, and we're going to do parent. So parent constraint will move the camera based on the object's scaling, rotation, and location. So it can work for things that don't have a lot of rotation to them. Another convenient factor is you can reset the rig, aim and focus, track again, and do copy location instead. And the reason why we're doing these again is because reset rig not only resets the rig's location, it also removes the relations so that you can start fresh. So since we've done track and copy location instead of parent, you're going to notice something a little different. The camera is not moving like it did with the object's rotation. So this is much better if you're following some very, very aggressively moving physics objects, rigid body physics objects. If they're spinning like crazy, your camera can still be stable and not orbit around that spinning. It will simply move with it in space and follow along. Next, we're going to talk about autofocus. This guy right here should not be taken for granted. It is useful for geometry that deforms because it's a kind of a shrink wrap that moves the anchor and the flow object towards it. So we're going to aim and focus on the floor. We're going to do autofocus on the floor. And with proportional edit select and grabbing this, you can see how our anchor is tracking to and moving with the deformation of the geometry. Now, the anchor itself can still be moved and manipulated and placed in different spots. So you can use the anchor as a way to highlight areas of interest and have the shrink wrap grab what's nearest the anchor. We could shift it over here. So that's autofocus. If you really need that laser focus on something like a character, let's say the character is like a pufferfish or something, and you need that focus to stay on the geometry, it will do that. Now we're going to move on to our mod panels. The anatomy of the rig also lists object 5, 6, and 7 corresponding to the camera flow, the track flow, and the shake panels. So you can click on these here in the outliner if you want to access this, but you can also click these buttons here in the panel to access those as well. And what they do is, we'll start with camera flow. We've already got our subject aimed and focused on. If we grab the flow controller and move it, there's a certain smoothing and a certain following speed. In the camera flow panel, you can adjust the main speed. So we change that from 1 to 0.1. It's going to be a lot slower. And if we pin it, it will stay put no matter what we've got selected, so we can easily adjust our parameters. So I'm going to put that back to 1 and manage named attributes. You can see the name of the flow type here. 2 is going to be snappy, and even though we've got it on speed 1, if we play back animation and grab the flow controller, we can see there is a little bit of smoothing added to it, but it is far more snappy and responsive. It's a different type of smoothing. If we change the flow type to number 3, this is Lux Flow. This is my personal favorite. I'm going to play back animation, grab the controller. If we move the controller fast enough, the camera goes very quickly, but then it just really slowly settles in. So you can get some really cool glamour shots. There is also a 4th type. If you enable advanced controls, you'll see Lux Flow's controls. There's more presets under that here. Number 1 is going to be exactly the same as LuxFlow. It's LuxFlow Classic, so you're going to see the same kind of lush smoothing towards the end and the fast response as we move the controller faster. These others, like Splice Drift, make the camera appear as if it's multiple cameras with some smoothing added for settling in. So it's very cool, making it look like there's a bunch of jump cuts. So there's quite a variety of presets that you have access to here, and you can tweak some parameters here. So for now, I'm going to disable the advanced and go back to the simple flow and move on to the next button, which is track flow. And by the way, you're going to want to unpin so you can get to the other panel. The track flow button has the exact same settings as our cam flow, but it's controlling the flow of the tracking. So playback animation and move the flow object for the tracking. I'm going to pin this panel here. We can turn down the main speed like we did before, so it's much slower. Or we can change the flow type to LuxFlow. So it's got a quick response on our distance and then settles in with a nice extra smoothness. It's also got the advanced controls with those presets, so we can definitely try the Splice Drift. Do some jump cut pans. The only difference is we have an extra thing on top of this called tracking type. This is really helpful if you have very specific cases where the tracking needs to be like, say, you're doing a loop-de-loop with an airplane and you don't want the camera to twist out of that loop. You can try these other options and they'll be more robust in that regard. Moving on to the shake panel, and this is something to look forward to. Toggle it on or off with the click of this button. But the shake panel gives you the parameters you can control that with. And what's super cool is this is seamless, so it's based on your scene frames and you can change those at any time and your camera shake will still be seamless. Moving on to the camera data button, that simply selects your CFP camera and opens up this panel here where you can adjust all sorts of camera settings. Of course, you could do the same thing here in Outliner if you click this button. Moving on to our shake and bake panel, obviously you can toggle on and off shake. You can randomize your shake. And you can see in the shake panel here, randomize just the noise W factor. Now, while this is doing its shake, you can click Bake CFP Camera, and it will copy both the camera and the depth of field target, and it will bake those to a new collection. And these are ready for export because they're baked to keyframes. Or they're ready for render in Blender because those solid keyframes are going to keep it from erroring any on the motion blur. So if we toggle our shake back off, we can see our baked camera. Super cool. Now, bake selected, this is a fun one. I'm going to reset the rig and do something unconventional and actually use it to kind of puppeteer an object. So we're going to use a torus, shade smooth. I'm going to clear the rotation of our root, put the donut here on the camera. We're actually going to use the camera as a parent of the donut, give the donut a little dance, and then bake the donut to keyframes. So select the donut, shift, select the camera, and then Control P to make the camera the parent of the donut. And then if you playback animation and grab one of your flow controller objects, you can pretty much make that thing dance. Cool. All right, but how do we actually record this? Well, there's a wonderful feature in Blender called auto keying. So if we enable this, playback, grab our flow controller, make that donut dance, stop the animation before it overwrites our previous keyframes. He's dancing. So now what? Well, you select the object and click Bake Selected. Now it's removed all the relationships and converted this object just to keyframes. And if I reset the rig, you'll see that is exactly the case. Blender has these delta transforms, so if you have an animation going on and if you need to modify the offset, you can with delta. You can also use a null object as a parent and move the thing over. Just depends on what you want to do. All right, cool. So that's what these features are for. It's a camera baking machine. Plus, you can use the Camera Flow Pro rig as a way to even puppeteer and move objects. and bake those out to keyframes. Now we're moving on to the turnaround panel. This is one of my favorite new features. We're going to reset the rig and root reset it to the world center. The way that turnaround works is it's going to orbit around the root of your rig. So you're going to want your root to be exactly where the point of interest is. So in that case, between these two objects. So I'm going to select these two objects at frame 1, and I'm going to cursor to selected. So cursor is in the middle of those. And then I'm going to take the root object selected to cursor. So now our root's going to be right there, and when the rotation happens automatically, it's going to be in the right spot. Now we're going to take the anchor for the cam location, simply move it out a bit here. Now simply toggle turnaround. Press playback. And this turnaround is built to work with your scene frame. So whatever length your scene is, it's going to perfectly seamlessly loop within that number of frames. And you can multiply the number of orbits within that time. You can even do negative numbers to reverse the direction. And it's all seamless. And it works on top of what you already got, including camera shake, including moving the object controllers. Another feature for the turnaround is the object properties button is a shortcut to take you to the root, where in Delta Transforms, and you can read this on the tooltips, in Delta Transforms, if you adjust the rotation on the X or the Y a little bit, and then change under Transform mode, if you change that, it's going to actually give you a bit of tilt, orbital tilt, which can give much more visual interest depending on what kind of turnaround you're looking for. And of course, we have the resets panel. Reset rig, root reset rig, and refresh sim. Hopefully you're not going to have to use refresh sim, but this is built in case geometry node simulations freeze up or go to sleep. It wakes them up very well. That concludes this walkthrough for Camera Flow Pro. If you'd like a more advanced tutorial going through the process of following a moving character and using extra offset features to help frame and reframe your shot, and some best practices, definitely check the documentation. We have sections specifically for that. Thanks for watching, and I wish you the best.